My sister showed up to my daughter's first birthday party uninvited, drunk, and ready to destroy everything I'd worked months to plan. She succeeded. But what she didn't know was that 3 weeks later, I'd be sitting in a courtroom holding the evidence that would change her life forever. If you think you know how this ends, you don't. Because sometimes the person who tries to ruin your celebration becomes the reason you finally find your voice. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Rebecca Martinez, and I need to tell you about the day my sister taught me that blood doesn't always mean loyalty. It was supposed to be perfect. Emma's first birthday. I'd been planning it for 3 months, ever since I realized my baby girl was actually going to make it to this milestone. You see, Emma was born 2 months early, weighing just over 3 pounds. We spent her first 8 weeks in the NICU, watching monitors, counting breaths, praying through the nights when the alarms went off, and the nurses rushed in with faces that said everything words couldn't. When we finally brought her home, I made a promise. Her first birthday wouldn't just be a party. It would be a celebration of survival, of tiny victories, of every single day she'd fought to be here. I wanted everything to be perfect because perfect felt like what we deserved after months of uncertainty. I rented the community center at Riverside Park, the one with the big windows overlooking the lake. Booked it 4 months in advance because I knew other families would want it too. I spent hours on Pinterest, designing a theme around butterflies and soft pastels. Emma loved butterflies. Whenever we walked outside, she'd reach her tiny hands toward them, making these little cooing sounds that melted my heart every single time. The decorations alone took me 2 weeks to assemble. Hand-painted butterfly cutouts in shades of lavender, mint, and cream, paper flowers that I crafted during Emma's naps, my fingers cramping from folding hundreds of delicate petals, a balloon arch that I practiced building 3 times in my garage before the actual day. I even hired a professional photographer, Sarah Chen, because I wanted to capture every moment. This wasn't just Emma's day. It was proof that we'd made it through the hardest year of our lives. My husband, Marcus, thought I was going overboard. "Becca, she's one. She won't even remember this," he'd say while I stayed up until midnight addressing invitations by hand. But he didn't understand. I would remember. Every detail, every smile, every moment where my daughter got to be celebrated instead of monitored. Where she got to be a normal baby instead of a medical case number. The guest list was carefully curated. My parents, Marcus's parents, our closest friends. A few neighbors who'd become like family during those scary early months. And my sister Stephanie. Of course, Stephanie had to be invited. She was my only sibling, and despite our complicated relationship, I couldn't imagine Emma's first birthday without her aunt there. Stephanie and I had always been different. She was 3 years older, the rebel who'd dropped out of college twice, who'd moved back in with our parents 4 times since turning 18, who treated every family gathering like her personal stage. But she was also the sister who'd driven 6 hours to see Emma in the NICU, who'd cried when she first held her niece, who'd promised she'd always be there for us. The problem started 2 weeks before the party. I called Stephanie to confirm she was coming, to tell her about the timing, the location, the small gift registry I'd set up for anyone who wanted to contribute to Emma's college fund, instead of buying toys she was too young to appreciate. "A gift registry for a 1-year-old? Stephanie laughed, but it wasn't a kind laugh. "Jesus, Becca, you've really lost yourself in this whole mom thing, haven't you?" I felt my chest tighten. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing, forget it. Yeah, I'll be there. Wouldn't miss watching you turn into one of those helicopter parents who thinks their kid is special. I should have said something. Should have asked her what was really going on, why she sounded so bitter, so angry. But I was too focused on the party planning, too exhausted from sleepless nights with a teething baby, too hopeful that maybe this time Stephanie would just show up and be supportive. The night before the party, I couldn't sleep. Marcus found me in the kitchen at 2 a.m, checking my lists for the 10th time. Menu items, decoration setup schedule, backup plans in case it rained. Everything was organized in color-coded folders, because that's how I handled anxiety, by controlling every detail I possibly could. "You've done everything," Marcus said, wrapping his arms around me from behind. "It's going to be beautiful." "What if something goes wrong?" I whispered. "What if the cake falls apart, or the photographer doesn't show up, or Emma has a meltdown, or—" "Then we'll handle it," he said simply, "together, like we always do." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was going to go wrong. Maybe it was intuition. Maybe it was just the anxiety that had become my constant companion since Emma's early arrival. Either way, I spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling, running through contingency plans I hoped I'd never need. The morning of the party dawned clear and bright. Perfect weather, no clouds in sight. I took it as a good sign. Emma woke up happy, babbling in her crib, reaching for the mobile of butterflies that hung above her bed. She wore the dress I'd bought specifically for this day, white with tiny embroidered flowers, a sash that matched the party decorations. She looked like an angel. Marcus and I arrived at the community center 2 hours early to set up. Everything went according to my carefully crafted timeline. The balloon arch went up perfectly. The tables looked exactly like the vision I'd carried in my head for months. The catered lunch arrived on schedule. The photographer showed up early to capture setup shots, and even Emma seemed to sense that this was a special day. She giggled at everything, clapped her hands at the decorations, and charmed every vendor who came to deliver supplies. By 11:30, guests started arriving. My parents came first, my mom immediately swooping Emma into her arms while my dad helped Marcus set up the music system. Marcus's parents brought homemade cookies shaped like butterflies, a surprise that made me tear up because it showed they'd been paying attention to the theme. Our friends arrived with beautifully wrapped gifts and genuine excitement. Mrs. Patterson from next door brought flowers from her garden. Everything was falling into place. At noon, we were supposed to start the formal program. Welcome speech, cake cutting, group photos by the lake. I kept checking my phone, looking toward the entrance, waiting for Stephanie. She hadn't responded to my text that morning asking for her ETA, but that was typical. Stephanie operated on her own timeline, always had. "Should we wait a few more minutes?" I asked Marcus, bouncing Emma on my hip while she reached for the butterfly garland hanging nearby. "Give her until 12:15. He said. "Then we start. This is Emma's day, not Stephanie's." 12:15 came and went. I made the welcome speech without my sister, thanking everyone for being part of Emma's special day, for supporting us through the challenging first year, for celebrating this milestone with us. I talked about how grateful we were to have Emma healthy and thriving, how much it meant to have people who loved her surrounding us. My voice only cracked once when I mentioned the NICU nurses who couldn't be there but had sent a card. We were halfway through lunch when I heard the commotion outside. Loud voices, car doors slamming, someone stumbling on the wooden steps leading up to the community center. I looked through the window and felt my stomach drop. Stephanie was here. But she wasn't alone, and she definitely wasn't sober. She'd brought 3 people I didn't recognize, all of them clearly drunk, despite it being barely past noon on a Sunday. Stephanie herself was wearing ripped jeans and a tank top that had seen better days, her hair unwashed and pulled back in a messy ponytail. She was carrying a bottle of wine in one hand and what looked like a gas station birthday card in the other. "The party can really start now," she announced as she pushed through the entrance, her voice carrying across the quiet room where families were enjoying lunch and watching toddlers play gently with butterfly-shaped bubbles. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned. Emma, who had been sitting in her high chair happily mashing banana pieces, looked up at the sudden noise and her bottom lip started to quiver. "Stephanie," I said quietly, walking toward her with my hands slightly raised like she was a wild animal I needed to approach carefully. "You made it." "Barely," she slurred, swaying slightly. "Traffic was murder, but hey, wouldn't miss the princess's big day, right?" She gestured broadly with the wine bottle, and I noticed her companions were already eyeing the food table like they hadn't eaten in days. "These are my friends," Stephanie continued without introducing anyone by name. "Hope you don't mind a few extra guests. The more the merrier, right?" I could feel every eye in the room on us. My parents looked mortified. Marcus's parents were whispering to each other with concerned expressions. Our friends were trying to pretend nothing unusual was happening, but their forced smiles gave them away. The photographer had lowered her camera, clearly unsure whether she should be documenting this moment. Of course, I managed, though my voice sounded strained even to my own ears. There's plenty of food. Let me just... Relax, sis, Stephanie interrupted, pushing past me toward the food table. We'll make ourselves at home, won't we, guys? Her friends needed no further invitation. They descended on the carefully arranged lunch spread like they were at a college kegger instead of a baby's birthday party. One of them grabbed a handful of the butterfly-shaped sandwiches I'd special ordered from a local bakery, eating them standing up while crumbs fell onto the pristine tablecloth. Another helped himself to 3 servings of pasta salad, not bothering with a proper plate. Stephanie, I tried again, lowering my voice and moving closer to her. Can we talk for a minute? Privately? She looked at me with eyes that were glassy and unfocused. What's wrong, Becca? Not happy to see your big sister? I thought family was supposed to be welcome everywhere. The emphasis she put on the word family felt like a slap, like she was calling out some hypocrisy she thought I was guilty of. But I had invited her. I had wanted her here, just not like this. You are welcome, I said carefully. This is a pretty quiet crowd and... Oh, I see, Stephanie said loudly, making sure everyone could hear. We're too loud for the fancy baby party. Too real for all these perfect suburban families with their perfect little lives. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Emma started crying. The sudden tension in the room, the raised voices, the unfamiliar chaos. It was too much for her. I immediately went to her high chair, lifting her up and holding her close, trying to soothe her with soft words and gentle bouncing. Great, Stephanie continued, gesturing toward Emma with her wine bottle. Now the princess is crying. Maybe she can sense when people are being fake. That's enough, Marcus said, stepping forward. His voice was calm but firm, the tone he used when he meant business. Stephanie, I think you need to... Oh, here comes the knight in shining armor, Stephanie laughed harshly. Marcus to the rescue, right? Can't let anyone mess up Becca's perfect little fantasy world. One of her friends had found the cooler of drinks and was helping himself to beer, despite the fact that most of the other guests were drinking lemonade and iced tea. Another was loudly commenting on how fancy everything looked, making it sound like an insult. I felt Emma's tears soaking through my shirt as she pressed her face against my shoulder. This was supposed to be her day, her celebration, her moment to be surrounded by love and joy and all the people who cared about her. Instead, she was frightened and overwhelmed, and I was powerless to fix it without making everything worse. Stephanie, please, I whispered, hoping she could hear the desperation in my voice. She's scared. Can we just... She's fine, Stephanie waved dismissively. Babies cry. That's what they do. Maybe if you stop treating her like she's made of glass, she'd toughen up a little. The photographer approached me hesitantly. Should I keep taking pictures? She asked quietly. I looked around the room. My parents were huddled together, whispering urgently. Marcus's parents had started gathering their things, clearly uncomfortable with the turn of events. Our friends were making polite excuses and checking their watches. Mrs. Patterson was openly staring at Stephanie's friends, who had now moved on to making loud jokes about the butterfly decorations. Give me a few minutes, I told Sarah. Maybe just take some candid shots of Emma with her grandparents for now. But even that became impossible when one of Stephanie's friends decided the music wasn't fun enough and started messing with the sound system, replacing the gentle acoustic playlist I'd carefully curated with loud rap music that had explicit lyrics and a pounding bass line. That's better, Stephanie cheered, raising her wine bottle in the air. Now this feels like a real party. Emma's crying intensified. Several of the older guests winced at the sudden volume change. The toddlers who had been happily playing were now looking around with wide, uncertain eyes, not sure why the atmosphere had shifted so dramatically. I felt something break inside me, not anger, exactly. More like the moment when you realize that the person you keep hoping will change never actually will. That the sister I wanted Stephanie to be, the one who would show up sober and celebrate my daughter, who would understand how important this day was to me, simply didn't exist. But I couldn't fall apart. Not here, not in front of everyone, not when Emma needed me to handle this. So I took a deep breath, bounced my daughter gently, and made a decision that would change everything between Stephanie and me forever. "Marcus," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the chaos around us, "call security." Security took 40 minutes to arrive. 40 minutes of watching my daughter's first birthday party dissolve into chaos while I stood there holding her, feeling completely powerless. Marcus had called the community center's management company, but their weekend security was contracted through a third-party service, and the dispatcher kept putting him on hold. In those 40 minutes, Stephanie's friends managed to spill red wine on the white tablecloth I'd spent 2 hours ironing the night before. They knocked over the butterfly centerpiece on the main table, scattering delicate paper flowers across the floor, where they were trampled by drunk footsteps. One of them tried to give Emma a sip of beer as a joke, and when Marcus intervened, the guy got aggressive, shoving my husband hard enough that he stumbled backward into the gift table. The carefully wrapped presents scattered across the floor. The handmade photo album my mom had put together, chronicling Emma's first year from NICU to now, landed face down in a puddle of spilled juice. Mrs. Patterson's garden flowers were crushed under someone's boot. The butterfly-shaped cookies from Marcus's parents were grabbed by the handful and eaten like bar snacks, crumbs grinding into the carpet I'd specifically chosen this venue for, because it was supposed to be beautiful. But the worst part wasn't the physical destruction, it was watching the guests leave. One by one, families made polite excuses and gathered their children, their faces a mixture of sympathy and second-hand embarrassment. My college roommate Jessica hugged me tightly and whispered, "I'm so sorry, Becca. Call me later, okay?" before ushering her 3-year-old toward the exit. The Hendersons from down the street waved awkwardly from across the room and slipped out without saying goodbye. Even my parents left early. My mother pulled me aside while my father distracted Stephanie and said quietly, "Honey, maybe it's best if we take your grandfather home. This environment isn't good for his heart condition." I wanted to scream that this wasn't my environment, that I hadn't created this chaos, but instead, I just nodded and kissed them goodbye, watching my support system evaporate one person at a time. By the time security finally arrived, 2 tired-looking men in ill-fitting uniforms who clearly dealt with drunk college kids more than disruptive family members, the party was effectively over. The beautiful celebration I'd planned for months had become a disaster story that people would probably tell at other gatherings. Remember Rebecca's baby's birthday party? The one where her sister showed up wasted with those random people? The security guards were surprisingly gentle with Stephanie and her friends, probably because they were dealing with intoxicated people in a public space with children present. They didn't arrest anyone or make a big scene. They just firmly escorted the group outside and waited until they got into their car. Thankfully, one of Stephanie's friends was sober enough to drive, before coming back to give me an incident report number. "Sorry this happened," the older guard said, handing me a carbon copy of the paperwork. "You might want to keep this for your records, in case there are any property damage claims or anything." Property damage, like my daughter's first birthday, was a crime scene instead of a celebration. After everyone left, it was just Marcus, Emma, and me in the destroyed community center. The rental agreement required us to clean up before leaving, so we spent 2 hours in silence, throwing away ruined decorations and trying to scrub wine stains out of the carpet. Emma had finally fallen asleep in her car seat, exhausted from all the commotion, her butterfly dress wrinkled and stained with tears. The cake sat untouched on the table. A custom-made masterpiece with 3 tiers, butterfly decorations, and "Happy First Birthday, Emma" written in delicate script. I'd spent $300 on it, money we could barely afford, because I wanted everything to be perfect. Now it looked absurd in the empty room, like a monument to my failed expectations. "We should take some pictures," Marcus said quietly, trying to salvage something from the day, "for Emma, so she has something to remember." I looked around at the chaos. Crushed flowers, stained carpet, overturned chairs, the lingering smell of alcohol and disappointment. Pictures of what? This disaster? "Pictures of us," he said simply. "Her family. The people who love her." So Sarah, the photographer, who had stayed long after she should have left, took photos of the 3 of us with Emma's cake. Marcus and I sat on either side of Emma's high chair, smiling as best we could while our daughter clapped her hands at the candles. In the photos, you can't see the destruction in the background. You can't smell the wine or hear the echo of raised voices. You just see a family celebrating a milestone, and maybe that's enough. But it wasn't enough for me. Not anymore. The drive home was silent, except for Emma's soft snoring from the back seat. Marcus kept glancing at me, probably waiting for me to cry or rage or have some kind of breakdown. But I felt eerily calm, like I was watching everything from outside my own body. The disappointment was too big to process all at once, so my brain had just shut down the emotional response system. We carried Emma inside and put her down for a nap, still in her birthday dress because I couldn't bear to change her out of it yet. Then Marcus and I sat at our kitchen table, surrounded by the gifts we'd managed to salvage from the party, and tried to figure out what had just happened. I should call Stephanie, I said finally. She was drunk. Maybe she doesn't even remember how bad it was. Marcus looked at me like I'd suggested setting myself on fire. Becca, no, absolutely not. She's my sister. She's your sister who just destroyed our daughter's first birthday party, who brought strangers into a room full of children, who made Emma cry on the day that was supposed to be about celebrating her. I knew he was right. But 28 years of being Stephanie's little sister doesn't disappear in one afternoon, even when that afternoon changes everything. I'd spent my entire life making excuses for her, covering for her, hoping that this time would be different. This time she'd show up sober. This time she'd remember what was important. This time she'd prove that the sister I loved was still in there somewhere. Maybe I should have called her earlier this week, I said, grasping for some way to make this my fault instead of hers. Checked in, made sure she was okay. She's been struggling since she lost that job at the salon. Stop, Marcus said firmly. Don't do that. Don't make this about something you did or didn't do. You invited her. You wanted her there. She chose to show up drunk with random people and ruin our daughter's party. That's on her, not you. But I couldn't stop. My brain kept circling back to all the ways I might have prevented this. If I'd called her the night before to confirm, if I'd set clearer boundaries about bringing guests, if I'd chosen a different venue, a smaller gathering, a less formal celebration. If I'd been a better sister, maybe she wouldn't have felt the need to sabotage something that meant so much to me. That night, after Marcus went to bed, I found myself looking through the photos from Emma's NICU days. Those first weeks when she was so tiny, so fragile, fighting for every breath. The pictures of her attached to machines, her skin translucent, her eyes barely open. The photos of me holding her for the first time, crying because she was so small, I was afraid I might break her. Stephanie had been there for some of those moments. She'd driven down from Portland twice during Emma's hospital stay, bringing coffee and sandwiches and sitting with me during the long afternoon hours when Marcus had to work. She'd held Emma's tiny hand through the incubator opening and cried right along with me. She'd promised that she would always be there for her niece, that Emma would never lack for the family who loved her. Where was that sister today? Where was the woman who'd sobbed when Emma first came home from the hospital, who'd helped me set up the nursery, who'd spent hours rocking Emma during those early colicky nights when I was too exhausted to function? I called her at midnight, not because Marcus thought I should, but because I needed to understand. I needed to know if the sister I'd grown up with was completely gone, or if there was some explanation that could make sense of what had happened. The phone rang 6 times before she answered, and when she did, her voice was thick with sleep and probably still drunk. Becca, what time is it? It's midnight. We need to talk. Jesus, can't this wait until tomorrow? I'm exhausted. You're exhausted? The words came out sharper than I'd intended. You're exhausted? From destroying my daughter's birthday party? There was a long pause. Then Stephanie laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Oh, come on. Don't be so dramatic. We had a few drinks and loosened things up a little. That party was like a funeral before we got there. A funeral? I could feel my voice rising, and I forced myself to stay quiet so I wouldn't wake Emma. It was a first birthday party for a baby who spent her first 2 months fighting for her life. It was supposed to be a celebration. It was supposed to be a celebration, Stephanie mimicked in a high-pitched voice that was cruel and mocking. God, Becca, listen to yourself. You've turned into one of those insufferable mom bloggers who thinks their kid is the center of the universe. Each word hit like a physical blow. This wasn't drunk rambling. This was deliberate, calculated meanness from someone who knew exactly how to hurt me. Emma is the center of my universe, I said quietly. She's my daughter, and today was important to me, and you destroyed it. I destroyed it? Stephanie's voice got louder, angrier. I showed up to support you, brought some friends to fill out your pathetic little gathering, and tried to inject some actual fun into your suburban mom fantasy. If you can't handle real people with real personalities, maybe you shouldn't invite them. You were drunk at noon on a Sunday. You brought strangers to a children's party. You made Emma cry. Emma cries anyway. She's a baby. That's what they do. The casual dismissal of my daughter's distress was the final straw. Something shifted inside me, like a door slamming shut on 28 years of sisterhood. Don't call me again, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Don't come to my house. Don't contact my family. You're not welcome in our lives anymore. Oh, please, Stephanie scoffed. You'll get over it. You always do. Remember when I crashed your college graduation party? Or when I brought that loser boyfriend to your wedding rehearsal dinner? You were mad for like a week, and then everything went back to normal. She was right, and that realization was almost worse than everything else. I had forgiven her before. Multiple times. I had made excuses, rebuilt bridges, pretended that her apologies meant she would change. I'd enabled her behavior by never enforcing real consequences, and now she thought she could destroy my daughter's birthday party and face nothing more than a temporary cooling-off period. This is different, I said. No, it's not. You'll calm down. Marcus will tell you to be the bigger person, and in a month you'll be calling me to apologize for overreacting. That's how this works, Becca. That's how it's always worked. Not anymore. We're sisters, she said, and for the first time her voice had a note of uncertainty. You can't just cut me out of your life. We're family. Family doesn't do what you did today. Family doesn't hurt people they claim to love, and then act like it doesn't matter. I hung up before she could respond, then immediately turned off my phone so she couldn't call back. I sat in the dark kitchen for a long time, listening to the quiet sounds of my sleeping house. Emma's soft breathing from the baby monitor, Marcus shifting in our bed upstairs, the hum of the refrigerator. Normal, peaceful sounds that belonged to the life I'd built, the family I'd chosen, the future I was protecting. When I finally went upstairs, I found Marcus awake, sitting up in bed with his laptop open. Couldn't sleep either? I asked. I was looking into security systems, he said, for the house, just in case. You think she'll try to come here? I think she's unpredictable when she's drinking, and I don't want to take any chances with you and Emma. The fact that we were having this conversation, that we were talking about protecting our home from my own sister, should have been devastating. Instead, it felt like relief, like finally acknowledging a truth I'd been avoiding for years. I told her not to contact us anymore, I said. Marcus closed the laptop and looked at me carefully. How do you feel about that? Like I should have done it years ago. He pulled me into bed beside him, and I curled up against his chest, feeling safe for the first time all day. But as I lay there in the dark, my mind kept racing. Because ending things with Stephanie was just the first step. The real question was what came next. How do you rebuild after someone you love proves they were never really on your side? How do you trust your own judgment when you've been wrong about someone for so long? And most importantly, how do you make sure they can never hurt your family again? I didn't know it yet, but the answer to that last question was already sitting in my email inbox, waiting for me to discover it in the morning. A message that would turn everything around, that would give me power I'd never had before, that would teach Stephanie that actions have consequences, even when you're used to avoiding them. Especially then. The email was from Detective Amanda Foster with the Portland Police Bureau. I found it Monday morning while Emma napped, and I scrolled through messages, still trying to process everything that had happened the day before. The subject line read, Witness Information Request, Case Hash, 2024 to 15,847. My first thought was spam. My second thought was that someone had stolen my identity. My third thought, the one that made my hand shake as I opened the message, was that this had something to do with Stephanie. Ms. Martinez, we understand that you may have information relevant to an ongoing investigation involving your sister, Stephanie Marie Rodriguez. We would appreciate the opportunity to speak with you at your earliest convenience regarding incidents that may have occurred in your presence. Please contact Detective Foster at the number below to schedule an interview. I read it 3 times before the words sank in. An ongoing investigation. Incidents in my presence. This wasn't about Emma's birthday party that had been yesterday. And besides, nothing illegal had happened. This was about something else entirely, something serious enough to warrant a detective's attention. I called the number immediately, my heart pounding as the phone rang. Detective Foster answered on the second ring, her voice professional but warm. Ms. Martinez, thank you for calling so quickly. I know this might come as a surprise, but we're hoping you can help us with some information about your sister's activities over the past few months. What kind of activities? I asked, though part of me already knew this wouldn't be good news. I'd prefer to discuss the details in person, if that's possible. Are you available to come to the station later this week? Or I could meet you somewhere more convenient if you prefer. My mind was racing. Stephanie had been unemployed for 3 months since losing her job at the salon. She'd claimed it was because the owner was downsizing, but now I wondered if there was more to the story. She'd been asking our parents for money more frequently lately, always with elaborate explanations about car repairs or medical bills or apartment deposits that never quite added up. Can you at least tell me what this is about? I pressed. Is Stephanie in trouble? There was a pause. Ms. Martinez, your sister was arrested last Friday night on charges of credit card fraud and identity theft. We believe this may be part of a larger pattern of behavior, and we're hoping you might have witnessed something that could help us build our case. The world tilted sideways. Credit card fraud, identity theft. These weren't petty crimes or misdemeanors. These were felonies, serious charges that could send someone to prison for years. And they wanted to know what I'd witnessed. Suddenly, a dozen small moments from the past few months came flooding back. Stephanie paid for expensive dinners when she claimed to be broke. The designer purse she'd carried to our mother's birthday lunch, laughing off questions about where she'd gotten it. The way she'd insisted on picking up the check at restaurants, always paying with different credit cards that she'd pull from a thick wallet stuffed with plastic. I can meet you Wednesday afternoon, I heard myself saying. After 2 o'clock, when my daughter gets up from her nap. Perfect. I'll text you the address. And Ms. Martinez? I want you to know that anything you tell us will be kept confidential during the investigation. We appreciate your cooperation. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at my phone, trying to process what I'd just learned. My sister, the woman who destroyed my daughter's birthday party less than 48 hours ago, was facing serious criminal charges, and the police thought I might be a witness to her crimes. I should have felt shocked. I should have felt worried about her, or guilty about talking to the police, or conflicted about potentially testifying against my own sister. Instead, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. For the first time in years, Stephanie's actions were going to have real consequences that I couldn't fix, couldn't minimize, couldn't enable by staying quiet. But I also felt something else, a strange sense of purpose. If the police needed my testimony to stop Stephanie from hurting other people the way she'd been hurting our family, then maybe everything that had happened was leading to this moment. I spent the next 2 days remembering. Not the big moments, those were already clear in my mind, but the small details that had seemed insignificant at the time. I wrote everything down in a notebook, dating each incident as precisely as I could recall. March 15th. Stephanie took our entire family to dinner at Riverbend Steakhouse for Dad's birthday. Expensive restaurant. Probably $300 for 6 people. When the check came, she insisted on paying, pulling out a black American Express card I'd never seen before. When Mom asked about it, Stephanie said she'd gotten a credit limit increase and wanted to, quote, treat the family. But she'd been unemployed for 2 weeks at that point. March 28th. Easter brunch at my parents' house. Stephanie arrived with elaborate gift baskets for everyone, including expensive organic chocolates and premium coffee. She also brought a bottle of wine that cost at least $80. I knew because Marcus and I had looked at the same bottle for our anniversary and decided it was too expensive. When I asked how she could afford such generous gifts while job hunting, she said she'd been doing some freelance consulting work, but was vague about the details. April 12th. We met for lunch at Café Luna downtown. Stephanie ordered the most expensive items on the menu and insisted on wine with lunch, despite it being a Tuesday afternoon. When the bill came to nearly $100 for 2 people, she paid with a credit card, but this time I noticed she had to try 3 different cards before one was accepted. She laughed it off, saying her bank was being weird about fraud protection, but the waitress gave her a strange look. April 20th. My birthday dinner. Marcus and I had planned a quiet celebration at home, but Stephanie insisted on taking us out somewhere special. She chose Elevation, the fancy restaurant on the top floor of the downtown hotel. 3-course tasting menu, cocktails, the works. The bill had to be over $400. She paid with yet another credit card I hadn't seen before, this one with a different name on it. Something like S. Rodriguez Chen or S. Chen Rodriguez. When I asked about the hyphenated name, she said she'd been experimenting with different combinations for professional reasons. May 5th, Mother's Day lunch. Stephanie gave our mom an expensive necklace from Nordstrom, still in the department store box with the price tag removed, but the security tag still attached. When Mom pointed out the security tag, Stephanie said the cashier had forgotten to remove it and offered to take it back to the store later. But she never did. I noticed Mom still hadn't worn the necklace, and when I asked her about it privately, she said she felt uncomfortable with such an expensive gift from someone who was supposed to be struggling financially. May 18th, Emma's 6-month checkup. Stephanie met us at the pediatrician's office because she'd been asking to spend more time with her niece. After the appointment, she suggested lunch at the nearby shopping center. While we were eating, she excused herself to run a quick errand and came back with shopping bags from 3 different stores. A new outfit for Emma, expensive face cream for me, and a cashmere scarf, just because. When I protested that she didn't need to spend money on us, she said she'd, quote, come into some unexpected money and wanted to share it with family. June 2nd. The last time I'd seen Stephanie before Emma's birthday party. We'd met for coffee at her request because she said she had something important to tell me. I'd hoped she was going to announce a new job, or maybe that she was getting her life together. Instead, she'd asked if she could list me as a reference for an apartment application. She'd found a place that was twice as expensive as her current studio, in one of the trendy neighborhoods downtown. When I asked how she could afford the rent increase, she'd gotten defensive and changed the subject. Writing it all down, seeing the pattern laid out in black and white, I felt sick. How had I missed it? How had I rationalized away so many red flags? But I also knew the answer, because I'd wanted to believe that Stephanie was finally doing better. Because I'd been raised to trust family, to give the benefit of the doubt, to believe that people could change. Wednesday afternoon, I drove to the Portland Police Bureau downtown, leaving Emma with Marcus's mother. The detective division was on the 3rd floor of a modern building that looked more like an office complex than a police station. Detective Foster met me in the lobby, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a firm handshake who immediately put me at ease. Thank you for coming in, she said as she led me to a small conference room. I know this can't be easy, talking about a family member this way. Actually, I said, surprising myself with my honesty, it's easier than I expected. Quote. Detective Foster raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. She set up a digital recorder and explained that the interview would be transcribed for the case file, then opened a thick folder filled with documents I couldn't see from my side of the table. Let's start with some basic information, she said. How often do you see your sister? What's your relationship like? I told her about our family dynamic, about Stephanie's history of instability, about the pattern of crisis and reconciliation that had defined our relationship for years. Detective Foster took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions, her expression remaining neutral throughout. Now, she said, I'd like to ask you about some specific incidents. We have reason to believe that your sister has been using stolen credit card information to make purchases over the past several months. We're trying to establish a timeline of her activities. She pulled out a series of photographs, surveillance footage from various restaurants and stores. My stomach dropped as I recognized Stephanie in several of them, sometimes alone, sometimes with people I didn't recognize. In one photo, she was clearly visible at the counter of an electronics store, handing over a credit card to pay for what looked like an expensive laptop. "Do you recognize any of these locations?" Detective Foster asked. I did. Riverbend Steakhouse, Cafe Luna, Nordstrom, the shopping center near Emma's pediatrician. Places where I'd watched Stephanie spend money she claimed not to have, using credit cards that apparently weren't hers. She took me to several of these places, I admitted. I watched her make purchases, but I didn't know. I trailed off, realizing how naive that sounded. "You had no reason to know," Detective Foster said gently. "Identity thieves often target people close to them precisely because those people trust them and don't ask questions." She showed me more evidence. Credit card applications filed under various names, some using addresses I recognized as belonging to Stephanie's former coworkers and neighbors. Bank statements showing purchases that matched the dates and amounts I'd written in my notebook. A sophisticated scheme that had been going on for at least 6 months, possibly longer. "Here's what we think happened," Detective Foster explained. "Your sister worked at a hair salon where clients often left their purses unattended while getting services. She appears to have been photographing credit cards and driver's licenses with her phone, then using that information to open new accounts or make online purchases. When she lost her job at the salon, she expanded the operation to include people in her personal life, neighbors, family friends, possibly even family members." That last comment sent a chill down my spine. Family members? "We found applications for credit cards using your parents' information, though it doesn't appear any were actually approved. She may have been testing the waters." I thought about all the times Stephanie had been alone in our parents' house over the past few months. All the family gatherings where purses and wallets had been left unattended while she was present. All the opportunities she'd had to photograph personal information, to copy down social security numbers, to betray the trust of people who loved her. "What happens now?" I asked. "That depends partly on you," Detective Foster said. "We have enough evidence to proceed with the charges we've already filed. But if you're willing to testify about what you witnessed, the purchases, the timeline, your sister's behavior, it would strengthen our case significantly." "What would that involve?" "Possibly a deposition, definitely testimony at trial if she doesn't plead guilty. I won't lie to you, it won't be easy. Defense attorneys often try to paint family members as vindictive or unreliable. But your testimony could be crucial in establishing the pattern of behavior we need to prove." I thought about Stephanie's phone call 2 nights ago, her certainty that I would get over it and forgive her, just like I always had. Her assumption that our family bond meant she could hurt me without consequences, that I would always choose loyalty over justice. "What are the charges?" I asked. 18 counts of credit card fraud, 6 counts of identity theft, and 3 counts of filing false financial documents. If convicted on all counts, she could face up to 15 years in prison. 15 years. Long enough for Emma to grow up without knowing her aunt, without being exposed to the toxicity that had poisoned my relationship with Stephanie for so long. Long enough for our family to heal from years of chaos and crisis. Long enough for Stephanie to face real consequences for the choices she'd made. "I'll testify," I said without hesitation. Detective Foster smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. "Thank you. I think you're making the right choice." As I walked back to my car, I felt lighter than I had in months. Not because I was happy about Stephanie's situation, I wasn't, but because for the first time in our relationship, I was choosing to protect myself and my family, instead of protecting her from the consequences of her actions. I drove home thinking about Emma, about the kind of woman I wanted her to become, strong enough to stand up for what was right, even when it was difficult, brave enough to choose justice over convenience, smart enough to recognize toxic behavior and refuse to enable it. Marcus was waiting in the kitchen when I got home, Emma playing at his feet with her favorite stuffed butterfly. "How did it go?" he asked. "I'm going to testify against her," I said. "She's been stealing from people for months, maybe years, using credit cards that don't belong to her, filing fake applications, targeting her own family." Marcus picked up Emma and hugged her close. "Are you okay with that decision?" I looked at my daughter, babbling happily in her father's arms, completely innocent and trusting. I thought about the kind of family I wanted to build for her, the kind of values I wanted to model. "More than okay," I said. "It feels like the right thing to do." That night, after Emma was asleep, I found myself looking at the calendar. Stephanie's court date was scheduled for August 15th, just 3 weeks away. 3 weeks to prepare for what would probably be the most difficult testimony I'd ever given. 3 weeks to steel myself for the moment when I would stand in a courtroom and tell the truth about my sister's crimes. 3 weeks to plan the perfect revenge for someone who thought family loyalty meant never holding her accountable. I had no idea yet just how perfect it would turn out to be. August 15th arrived with the kind of crisp morning air that promised autumn was coming. I'd been awake since 5, sitting in Emma's nursery watching her sleep, trying to calm my nerves before the biggest day I'd had in years. Today, I would walk into a courtroom and testify against my own sister. Today, Stephanie would finally face consequences she couldn't charm, manipulate, or drink her way out of. Marcus had taken the day off work to watch Emma. We discussed bringing her to the courthouse for moral support, but decided a criminal trial wasn't the place for a 13-month-old, no matter how much I might need her calming presence. Instead, I kissed my daughter goodbye at 7:30 and drove downtown alone, my hands steady on the wheel for the first time in weeks. The Multnomah County Courthouse was busier than I'd expected. Lawyers in expensive suits hurried past families clustered on benches, their faces showing various degrees of worry and hope. I found Detective Foster near the courtroom entrance, looking professional in a navy blazer and carrying a thick briefcase. "Ready for this?" she asked, giving my shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, though my stomach was churning with a mixture of anticipation and dread. She walked me through what would happen: opening statements, witness testimony, cross-examination, closing arguments. My testimony would come after the prosecution established the basic facts of the case with bank representatives and fraud investigators. I would be called to provide context about Stephanie's behavior and spending patterns, to help the jury understand how the scheme had operated in real life. "Remember," Detective Foster said, "just tell the truth. Don't embellish, don't speculate. Stick to what you saw and heard. The defense attorney might try to rattle you, but stay calm and answer only what's asked." I nodded, checking my watch. 9:15. Court would begin in 15 minutes, and I still hadn't seen any sign of my family. Part of me had wondered if my parents would show up, either to support Stephanie or to witness this final chapter in our family's dysfunction. But the hallway remained empty of familiar faces. At 9:30 sharp, we were called into the courtroom. The space was smaller than I'd expected from television shows, with wood-paneled walls and fluorescent lighting that cast everything in a harsh, institutional glow. The jury box held 12 people who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, commanded the room with quiet authority. And there, at the defendant's table, sat Stephanie. I barely recognized her. Gone was the disheveled woman who'd stumbled into Emma's birthday party 3 weeks ago. This version of my sister wore a conservative gray suit, her hair pulled back in a neat bun, minimal makeup applied with precision. She looked like a different person entirely. Professional, composed, almost innocent. Her defense attorney, a silver-haired man in an expensive suit, sat beside her whispering instructions. Stephanie's eyes found mine across the courtroom, and for a moment, our gazes locked. I expected to see anger, betrayal, hurt, some reaction to the fact that her own sister was here to testify against her. Instead, her expression was blank, almost curious, as if she was seeing me for the first time. The prosecution opened with a methodical presentation of the evidence. Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Walsh walked the jury through bank records, surveillance footage, and credit card applications, building a timeline of fraud that spanned 8 months and involved dozens of victims. She spoke clearly and precisely, letting the facts speak for themselves. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said during her opening statement, "this is a case about trust betrayed on multiple levels. The defendant didn't just steal credit card numbers from strangers. She targeted coworkers, neighbors, family friends, people who trusted her enough to leave their personal belongings unattended in her presence. She exploited those relationships systematically and without remorse, causing financial and emotional damage that extends far beyond the dollar amounts involved. The defense attorney's opening was predictably different. Robert Chen, and yes, I noticed the irony of his last name matching one of Stephanie's fraudulent identities, painted his client as a struggling single woman who'd made poor choices during a difficult period in her life. My client is not a criminal mastermind, he told the jury. She is a woman who lost her job, fell behind on bills, and made some regrettable decisions under financial pressure. The prosecution wants you to see a calculated scheme. But what you'll actually see is someone who spiraled into bad choices and is deeply remorseful for the harm she's caused. I wanted to scoff. Deeply remorseful? This was the same woman who'd called me dramatic and told me to get over it when I confronted her about destroying Emma's party. But I kept my expression neutral and waited for my turn to speak. The first witness was Amanda Stevens, a fraud investigator from Chase Bank. She testified about the sophisticated nature of the scheme, the way Stephanie had used real personal information to create convincing fake identities, and the careful timing of purchases to avoid immediate detection. Her testimony was technical and thorough, establishing the scope of the fraud with clinical precision. Next came Sarah Kim, the former manager of Lux Salon, where Stephanie had worked. She described how clients regularly left purses and phones unattended during hair treatments, how Stephanie often volunteered to watch the front desk during busy periods, how the salon's security cameras had captured her photographing customer belongings on multiple occasions. I trusted her completely, Sarah testified, her voice shaking slightly. She'd worked for me for 2 years. I never imagined she was stealing from our clients. When the police showed me the surveillance footage, I felt sick. These were women who came to us to feel beautiful, to relax, to treat themselves. And she was preying on them. Then it was my turn. Assistant District Attorney Walsh called my name, and I walked the witness stand on legs that felt steadier than I'd expected. The bailiff swore at me in, and I placed my hand on the Bible, promising to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. As I sat down, I caught sight of Stephanie again. She was leaning back in her chair, arms crossed, watching me with what looked like mild amusement. Please state your name for the record, Adia Walsh began. Rebecca Martinez. And what is your relationship to the defendant? She's my sister. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Even though the jury had been told a family member would testify, hearing it stated so plainly seemed to impact them. I saw several jurors glance between Stephanie and me, perhaps trying to see the family resemblance, perhaps wondering what kind of person testifies against their own sibling. Ms. Martinez, I'd like to ask you about several incidents over the past year where you observed your sister making purchases or spending money. Let's start with March 15th of this year. For the next 45 minutes, I walked through every incident I'd documented in my notebook. The expensive dinner for our father's birthday. The elaborate Easter gifts. The designer purse and jewelry. The restaurant meals that cost more than most people spend on groceries in a week. Each time, Ada Walsh asked specific questions. What did I observe? How did Stephanie pay? What explanation did she give for her ability to afford these things? I answered each question clearly and directly, sticking to the facts as Detective Foster had advised. I didn't editorialize or speculate. I simply described what I'd seen and heard, letting the jury draw their own conclusions about the pattern of behavior. Ms. Martinez, Ada Walsh said as we neared the end of my direct testimony. During this time period, what was your understanding of your sister's employment status? She was unemployed for most of it. She lost her job at the salon in late February and claimed to be looking for work, but as far as I knew, she wasn't earning any regular income. Did you ever question how she was able to afford these expensive purchases while unemployed? I did. When I asked, she gave various explanations: freelance work, credit limit increases, unexpected money from unnamed sources. But the explanations were always vague and changed depending on the situation. Did you believe these explanations? I paused, considering my answer carefully. I wanted to believe them, but looking back, I realized they never made sense. The math didn't add up. Thank you, Ms. Martinez. No further questions. Now came the part I'd been dreading, cross-examination. Defense attorney Chen stood up slowly, adjusting his tie and picking up a legal pad covered in notes. He smiled at me, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. Ms. Martinez, you've testified that you and your sister have a complicated relationship. Is that fair to say? Yes. In fact, you recently cut off all contact with her, didn't you? Yes. And that was because of an incident at your daughter's birthday party, correct? Here it comes, I thought. He was going to try to make this about revenge, about me being vindictive because of what happened at Emma's party. But I was ready for this. That was the final incident that led to my decision, yes. You were angry with your sister for her behavior at that party, weren't you? I was disappointed and hurt. Disappointed enough to call the police on her when they contacted you about this investigation? Ada Walsh stood up. Objection, Your Honor. The witness didn't initiate contact with law enforcement. Sustained, the judge said. Rephrase your question, Mr. Chen. Ms. Martinez, when the police contacted you about this investigation, you were eager to cooperate, weren't you? I was willing to tell the truth about what I'd observed. The truth as you see it, you mean. The truth as it happened. Chen walked closer to the witness stand, trying to establish dominance through proximity. Isn't it true that you've always been jealous of your sister? The question surprised me. Jealous? She's 3 years older, more outgoing, more adventurous. Isn't it true that you've always resented living in her shadow? I almost laughed. Living in Stephanie's shadow? If he only knew how much of my life I'd spent cleaning up her messes, making excuses for her behavior, covering for her mistakes. No, I said simply, that's not true. Come now, Ms. Martinez. Your sister travels, she's spontaneous, she takes risks. You're married with a baby, living a quiet suburban life. Surely there's some part of you that wishes you had her freedom? I chose my life, I said, my voice stronger now. I chose my husband, my daughter, and my responsibilities. I don't want the kind of freedom that comes from hurting other people. Chen's smile faltered slightly. But you admit that your perspective on your sister's activities might be colored by personal feelings? My perspective is based on what I witnessed. The personal feelings came later, when I realized what I'd been witnessing. And what exactly did you witness, Ms. Martinez? Did you see your sister steal credit card numbers? No. Did you see her file false applications? No. Did you see her use cards that didn't belong to her? I saw her use multiple credit cards with different names on them. I saw her spend money she claimed not to have. I saw her target vulnerable people and exploit their trust. But you don't actually know where that money came from, do you? You're speculating, aren't you? This was the moment I'd been preparing for. The moment when I had to choose between protecting my sister one last time or telling the complete truth. Mr. Chen, I said, looking directly at him, 3 weeks ago, my sister showed up drunk to my daughter's first birthday party with strangers who destroyed the celebration I'd spent months planning. When I called her that night to tell her how hurt I was, she laughed at me. She told me I'd get over it, just like I always do. She said that's how our relationship works. She hurts me, I forgive her, and everything goes back to normal. The courtroom was completely silent. Even Chen seemed taken aback by my candor. She was right, I continued. That is how our relationship has always worked. But sitting in this courtroom today, listening to testimony about how she targeted vulnerable people, how she stole from clients who trusted her, how she exploited every relationship in her life for financial gain, I realized I wasn't just enabling her poor choices. I was enabling someone who was systematically victimizing innocent people. Quote, I looked at Stephanie then, really looked at her for the first time since entering the courtroom. She was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger or hurt, but something closer to respect. Like she was finally seeing me as an equal, instead of the little sister who could always be counted on to back down. So no, Mr. Chen, I said, turning back to the defense attorney. I'm not speculating about where the money came from. I'm testifying about a pattern of behavior that I observed over months. Behavior that I now understand was part of a deliberate scheme to defraud innocent people. And I'm testifying because it's the right thing to do, even when it's the hardest thing to do. Chen looked down at his notes, clearly struggling to find his next line of attack. Finally, he said, No further questions, Your Honor. As I stepped down from the witness stand, I felt something I hadn't expected. Pride. Not in what Stephanie had done, but in what I had done. For the first time in our relationship, I had chosen truth over loyalty, justice over family obligation, protecting the innocent over protecting the guilty. The trial continued for 2 more days. Additional witnesses testified about Stephanie's crimes, about the financial and emotional damage she'd caused, about the sophisticated nature of her fraud scheme. The prosecution presented evidence that she'd stolen over $47,000 from 18 different victims, some of them elderly, some of them struggling financially themselves. The defense tried to paint her as a victim of circumstances, someone who'd made mistakes but deserved compassion rather than prison time. They called character witnesses who testified about her kindness, her struggles, her potential for rehabilitation. But in the end, the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning with their verdict: guilty on all counts. As the judge read the verdict, I watched Stephanie's face. She didn't cry or protest or show any visible emotion. She simply nodded, as if she'd been expecting this outcome all along. Her attorney whispered something in her ear, but she didn't respond. Sentencing was scheduled for the following month. Based on the charges and her criminal history, apparently this wasn't her first offense, though it was the first time she'd been caught. She was facing between 8 and 12 years in prison. As the courtroom cleared, Stephanie finally looked at me one last time. She mouthed a single word: "Wow." I wasn't sure if it was an acknowledgement of what I'd done, or surprise that I'd actually followed through, or something else entirely. But for the first time in our relationship, I didn't feel the need to interpret her reaction or adjust my behavior based on her response. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt free in a way I hadn't experienced since childhood. Free from the obligation to cover for someone else's mistakes. Free from the guilt of enabling destructive behavior. Free from the exhausting cycle of crisis and reconciliation that had defined our relationship for decades. I drove home to my husband and daughter, to the quiet suburban life that Robert Chen had tried to make sound boring and small. But it didn't feel small anymore. It felt exactly right. It felt like home. The real surprise came later that evening, when I checked my phone and discovered that someone had been recording inside the courtroom. The video was posted on TikTok at 11:47 p.m. that same night. I was giving Emma her bedtime bottle when my phone started buzzing with notifications I'd never seen before. Text messages from numbers I didn't recognize. Instagram followers jumped from my usual 200 to over 3,000. Facebook messages from complete strangers saying things like, "You're my hero," and "That took real courage." Marcus looked over from where he was folding laundry, concerned by the constant pinging of my phone. "What's going on?" I opened TikTok, an app I rarely used except to watch funny videos when I couldn't sleep. The notification showed I'd been tagged in a post by an account called @CourtroomChronicles. The video had been viewed 847,000 times and counting. It was footage from the courthouse, clearly shot from the gallery during my testimony. The quality was grainy, probably filmed secretly with a phone, but the audio was crystal clear. The video started right at the moment when defense attorney Chen asked if I was jealous of my sister's freedom. There I was, sitting in the witness stand, my voice steady and strong as I responded, "I chose my life. I chose my husband, my daughter, and my responsibilities. I don't want the kind of freedom that comes from hurting other people." But the part that was really going viral was my final statement to Chen, when I'd looked directly at Stephanie and talked about the pattern of enabling I'd finally broken. The video captured the exact moment I said, "I'm testifying because it's the right thing to do, even when it's the hardest thing to do." The caption read, "Sister testifies against sister in credit card fraud trial. The strength it took to do this. Respect #family drama, #justice, #courage over comfort, #sister vs sister." The comments were overwhelming. Thousands of them, pouring in faster than I could read. This gave me chills, the way she didn't back down. I wish I had half this woman's courage. Family doesn't mean enabling toxic behavior, period. The sister in the suit looks shook when she realizes her little sister isn't playing games anymore. "I don't want the kind of freedom that comes from hurting other people," iconic line. Anyone else notice how the defendant's face changed when her sister started speaking the truth? This is what setting boundaries looks like. Take notes, people. I scrolled through comment after comment, my heart racing. Emma had fallen asleep in my arms, but I couldn't move. I was transfixed by the response from thousands of strangers who somehow understood exactly what that moment had cost me. "Becca," Marcus said gently, "you're shaking." He was right. My hands were trembling as I held the phone, not from fear or anxiety, but from something I couldn't quite name. Relief, maybe. Validation. The overwhelming realization that I wasn't alone in understanding how difficult it could be to choose justice over family loyalty. I showed Marcus the video, watching his face as he listened to my testimony. His eyes grew wide as he saw the view count, which had jumped to over 1 million while we'd been watching. "This is incredible," he said. "Look at these comments, Becca. You're inspiring people." He was right. Mixed in with the supportive messages were dozens of people sharing their own stories. My brother stole from me for years, and I kept covering for him. Watching this gave me the strength to finally press charges. My sister destroyed my wedding, and I still invited her to my baby shower because family, never again. I testified against my dad for domestic violence, and my whole family cut me off. This reminds me I did the right thing. Anyone who says, "but they're family," after someone hurts you, needs to watch this video. I was crying now, though I wasn't entirely sure why. Happy tears, I thought. Overwhelmed tears. The tears of someone who'd carried the weight of a difficult decision alone and suddenly realized she had an army of supporters who understood. The video continued to grow throughout the night. By morning, it had been viewed over 5 million times. It had been reposted to Twitter, where it gained another 2 million views. Someone had uploaded it to YouTube with the title, "Woman Testifies Against Sister, Most Powerful Courtroom Moment Ever," and it was trending in the news category. But the real surprise came when my phone rang at 8 a.m. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize with a New York area code. "Is this Rebecca Martinez?" The voice was professional, polished, with just a hint of excitement. "Yes, who is this?" "My name is David Chen, and no relation to the defense attorney," he said with a chuckle. "I'm a producer with Good Morning America. We'd love to have you on the show to discuss your testimony and the response it's generated. Would you be available for a phone interview this afternoon that we could air tomorrow morning?" Good Morning America, national television. I looked at Marcus, who was listening to my side of the conversation with raised eyebrows. I need to think about it," I managed. "Of course. I'll send you my contact information. The story is really resonating with people, Rebecca. The courage it took to testify against your own sister, the way you stood up for what was right despite the personal cost, it's inspiring millions of people who face similar situations with toxic family members." After I hung up, I sat in stunned silence. Marcus was already looking up the video on his laptop, showing me that it had been picked up by major news outlets. CNN, Fox News, NBC, The Washington Post, all running stories about the sister who chose justice over family loyalty. "This is surreal," I said, bouncing Emma on my knee while she babbled happily, completely oblivious to the chaos surrounding her mother's sudden internet fame. My phone continued ringing throughout the morning. Producers from Dr. Phil, Ellen, The View, reporters from newspapers and magazines. Podcasters wanted to interview me about family dynamics and setting boundaries. A literary agent who thought I should write a book about the experience. But the call that surprised me most came at 11 a.m. from an unlisted number. "Rebecca?" The voice was familiar, though I hadn't heard it in weeks. "Mom?" "I saw the video," she said quietly. "I saw what you did." Quote. I waited, not sure if she was calling to yell at me or support me. With my parents, it could go either way. "I'm proud of you," she said, and I could hear tears in her voice. "I'm proud of you for telling the truth, even when it was hard, even when it was about family." "Mom?" "No, let me finish. Your father and I have been talking all morning. We've been enabling Stephanie for years, just like you said. Making excuses, covering for her, pretending her problems were always someone else's fault. We watched that video and realized you were the only one brave enough to stop the cycle." I was crying again, but these were definitely happy tears. "I was so scared you'd hate me for it." "Hate you? Rebecca, you probably saved other families from going through what we've been through. You stopped her from victimizing more innocent people. You did what we should have done years ago." We talked for another 20 minutes, the longest honest conversation my mother and I had shared in years. She told me they'd been horrified to learn about the extent of Stephanie's crimes, that they'd had no idea she'd been stealing from strangers while they'd been sending her money to, quote, help with rent. They'd decided to attend the sentencing hearing to show support for me, not Stephanie. "We love her," Mom said. "We'll always love her. But love doesn't mean protecting someone from the consequences of their choices." After we hung up, I realized that going viral had given me something I hadn't expected: a platform to talk about the difficult realities of family dysfunction. The thousands of comments on the video weren't just people praising me. They were people sharing their own stories of having to choose between family loyalty and doing what was right. I decided to do the Good Morning America interview. The segment aired the next morning, a 6-minute piece that included clips from the viral video and a live phone interview with me. The host, Robin Roberts, asked thoughtful questions about the decision to testify, the challenges of setting boundaries with family members, and the response from strangers online. "What would you say to someone who's in a similar situation?" she asked. "Someone who knows a family member is doing something wrong but feels conflicted about speaking up?" "I'd say that protecting someone from consequences isn't actually protecting them," I answered. "It's enabling them to continue hurting other people and themselves. Real love sometimes means letting people face the results of their choices, even when it's painful for everyone involved." And the response you've received? Millions of people have watched your testimony. What does that tell you? It tells me that there are a lot of people out there who've been in impossible situations with family members, and they felt alone in trying to navigate those relationships. Maybe my story helps them realize they're not alone, and that choosing to do the right thing doesn't make them bad family members. It makes them strong people. The interview generated even more attention. The original TikTok video now had over 20 million views. #CourageOver.comfort was trending on Twitter. Parenting blogs were writing articles about teaching children that family loyalty doesn't mean overlooking harmful behavior. But the most meaningful response came in my DMs, hundreds of private messages from people sharing their own stories. A woman whose brother had been embezzling from their family business for years, and who'd finally found the courage to turn him in after watching my testimony. A man whose sister had been abusing prescription drugs and stealing from their elderly mother, and who'd decided to stage an intervention instead of continuing to cover for her. A college student whose cousin had been sexually harassing her friends, and who'd reported him to campus authorities despite family pressure to quote, keep it quiet. Parents who'd realized they'd been enabling their adult children's destructive behavior and had decided to stop providing financial support without accountability. Each message reminded me that my decision to testify hadn't just been about Stephanie. It had been about standing up for everyone she'd victimized, and everyone who would have been victimized if her behavior had continued unchecked. A week after the Good Morning America interview, I received an email that made me laugh out loud. It was from a criminal justice professor at Portland State University, asking if I'd be willing to speak to her class about victim advocacy and the criminal justice system. She'd assigned the video of my testimony as required viewing for her students. "Your testimony has become a case study in our program," she wrote. "The way you maintained composure under cross-examination, the clarity with which you presented facts, and your courage in prioritizing justice over family loyalty, it's exactly what we hope to teach our students about effective witness testimony." I was being asked to speak at universities, women's groups, and legal conferences. A victims' rights organization wanted me to join their board. A publisher was interested in a book about navigating toxic family relationships. But perhaps the most unexpected development came when I received a call from Sarah Kim, the manager of the salon where Stephanie had worked. "I wanted to thank you," she said. "Your testimony helped us understand the scope of what happened. Several of our clients had noticed suspicious activity on their credit cards after appointments, but they never connected it to the salon. Seeing how systematic it was, how planned, it helps them understand it wasn't their fault for trusting someone they had no reason not to trust." She paused, then continued. 3 of our clients saw your testimony online and reached out to us. They wanted to thank you for having the courage to speak up. One of them said watching you testify gave her the strength to report financial elder abuse by her own grandson. The ripple effects kept expanding. Local news stations ran follow-up stories about credit card fraud prevention. Support groups for families of white-collar criminals reached out to me for advice on setting boundaries. True crime podcasters wanted to examine the case as an example of how family enabling can escalate criminal behavior. I started getting recognized in public. People would approach me in grocery stores or coffee shops to thank me for speaking my truth, or to share their own experiences with difficult family members. It was surreal, being recognized for something that had felt like the most private, personal decision of my life. But the recognition I treasured most came from Emma's pediatrician during her 15-month checkup. Dr. Martinez, no relation, despite the shared last name, had seen the video and the subsequent interviews. "I just want you to know," she said, while Emma played with toy blocks on the examination table, "that what you did will probably prevent other children from growing up in homes where criminal behavior is normalized. Breaking generational patterns of dysfunction takes tremendous courage, and you've modeled that for your daughter in a way she'll understand when she's older." She was right. Emma would grow up knowing that her mother had chosen to do the right thing even when it was difficult. She'd learn that love doesn't mean tolerating harmful behavior, that family loyalty has limits, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's destructive choices. The video eventually reached a plateau at 37 million views across all platforms. The comment section became a space where people shared resources for dealing with toxic family members, support group information, and legal advice for those considering reporting crimes by relatives. I realized that going viral had transformed my personal story into something larger, a conversation starter about family dynamics, accountability, and the courage required to break cycles of enabling. What had started as one woman's decision to testify against her sister had become a movement of sorts, encouraging people to prioritize doing what's right over maintaining family peace. But none of the attention, interviews, or praise could have prepared me for what happened next, when the people who'd abandoned me after Stephanie destroyed Emma's party suddenly wanted back into my life. The reckoning was about to begin. The first attempt at reconciliation came disguised as concern for Emma's well-being. It was a Tuesday morning, 2 weeks after my Good Morning America appearance, when my doorbell rang at 9 o'clock sharp. Through the peephole, I saw my cousin Patricia, Stephanie's closest ally in our extended family, the woman who'd always defended her free spirit and criticized the rest of us for being too judgmental. I almost didn't answer. Emma was having her morning snack, and I'd been enjoying the peaceful routine we'd established since cutting toxic people out of our lives. But curiosity got the better of me. "Rebecca," Patricia said the moment I opened the door, pushing past me into the entryway without invitation, "we need to talk." She was carrying a gift bag from an expensive children's boutique and wearing the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes, the same expression she'd perfected at family gatherings when she wanted to start drama while maintaining plausible deniability. "Patricia," I said carefully, not moving from the doorway, "what are you doing here?" Quote, "I brought something for Emma," she said, holding up the gift bag like a peace offering, "and I wanted to check on you. This whole situation has been so hard on the family." Hard on the family. Not hard on me, not hard on Stephanie's victims, not hard on the people whose trust she'd betrayed. Hard on the family members who were embarrassed by the public attention. "Emma's fine," I said. "We're fine." Patricia set the gift bag down and looked around my living room with the kind of pointed assessment that was meant to find fault. "Are you, though? This whole media circus, dragging our family business into the public eye, it can't be healthy for a baby to have all this chaos around her." I felt my jaw tighten. This was exactly the kind of manipulation I'd been subjected to my entire life. The suggestion that standing up for myself was somehow harmful to others, that protecting my family from toxic behavior was actually the problem. "The only chaos in Emma's life was caused by Stephanie," I said evenly, "and that's over now. But at what cost?" Patricia stepped closer, lowering her voice like she was sharing a confidence. "Rebecca, honey, I saw the video. I saw what you said in that courtroom. Don't you think you were a little harsh? She's your sister. She made some mistakes, but sending her to prison?" Mistakes. That's what she was calling systematic fraud targeting vulnerable people. Mistakes. "She committed 18 felonies," I said. "She stole from elderly people, from families struggling financially, from her own coworkers. Those weren't mistakes, Patricia. Those were deliberate crimes. But she was desperate. She lost her job. She was behind on rent. So are millions of other people who don't resort to stealing credit card numbers. Patricia's sympathetic mask slipped slightly, revealing the irritation underneath. You know what I think? I think this has nothing to do with those credit cards, and everything to do with you finally having an excuse to punish Stephanie for being everything you're not. There it was, the real reason for her visit. Not concern for Emma, not family reconciliation, character assassination disguised as tough love. And what exactly is Stephanie that I'm not? I asked, genuinely curious to hear this analysis. Free, spontaneous, unafraid to take risks. She's lived more in 31 years than you have in 28. And now that she's finally facing some consequences for being human, you're making sure she pays the maximum price. I looked at Patricia, really looked at her, and saw someone who'd spent so many years defending the indefensible that she'd lost the ability to recognize right from wrong. Someone who'd built her identity around being the understanding family member, the one who never judged, never set boundaries, never held anyone accountable. Patricia, I said quietly, I need you to leave. Don't be ridiculous. I'm here because I care about you. No, you're here because the family is embarrassed that their dirty laundry went viral, and they sent you to convince me to make some kind of public statement supporting Stephanie. Her face flushed red. That's not... Did Uncle Robert put you up to this, Aunt Linda? How many family members have called you this week asking you to talk sense into me? The silence that followed was answer enough. Leave, I repeated, moving toward the door, and take your guilt trip with you. Rebecca, you're making a mistake. Family is forever. Stephanie might have problems, but she's still your sister, and cutting her out of your life completely will protect my daughter from growing up thinking it's normal for family members to lie, steal, and manipulate each other. I opened the front door wide. Goodbye, Patricia. She gathered her purse and the untouched gift bag, her composure finally cracking. Fine. But don't come crawling back to us when you realize how lonely it is being right all the time. After she left, I stood in my kitchen shaking with anger. Not because of what she'd said, but because of how predictable it had been. The concerned visit, the expensive gift to prove her good intentions, the suggestion that I was somehow harming Emma by protecting her from dysfunction. It was manipulation 101, and I'd watched it work on family members for decades. But I wasn't the same person who'd spent years absorbing that kind of treatment. The woman who'd testified in court, who'd chosen truth over family peace, who'd inspired millions of strangers to examine their own toxic relationships, that woman wasn't going to be guilted into backing down. The phone calls started that afternoon. Uncle Robert wondering if we could talk through this situation like adults. Aunt Linda suggesting family therapy to, quote, heal the rift. My cousin Daniel asking if I really wanted Emma to grow up without knowing her aunt. Each conversation followed the same pattern. Concern for family unity, subtle suggestions that I was being vindictive, emphasis on forgiveness and moving forward. None of them mentioned Stephanie's victims. None of them acknowledged the real harm she'd caused. They were all focused on managing the family's reputation and getting back to the comfortable dysfunction they'd maintained for years. The most infuriating call came from my father's brother Mike, who'd always positioned himself as the family patriarch despite having no real authority over anyone. Rebecca, he said in the tone he'd used when I was 12 and had gotten in trouble for talking back to adults, this has gone far enough. You've made your point. Now it's time to start thinking about healing and forgiveness. Have you talked to any of Stephanie's victims about healing and forgiveness? I asked. That's not the point. It's exactly the point. She stole $47,000 from innocent people. Some of them are elderly, some of them are struggling financially. But you're not calling them about forgiveness. You're only calling me because my testimony embarrassed the family. You're being dramatic. I'm being realistic. And realistic people don't enable criminals just because they share DNA. I hung up before he could respond, then turned off my phone for the rest of the day. But the pressure campaign was just getting started. 2 days later, I found a handwritten letter in my mailbox from my grandmother, my father's mother, the 90-year-old matriarch who'd always been treated as the ultimate authority on family matters. Dearest Rebecca, the letter began in her spidery handwriting. I've been watching the news and reading about what happened with Stephanie. I know you think you did the right thing, but I'm worried about what this is doing to our family. She went on to talk about the importance of forgiveness, about how families needed to stick together through difficult times, about how public attention was unseemly for people of our background. She mentioned her own childhood during the Depression, when families had to rely on each other to survive, when airing grievances outside the family was considered a betrayal of the deepest kind. I'm not asking you to forget what Stephanie did, the letter concluded. I'm asking you to remember that she's family, and family means something. Blood is thicker than water, dear. It always has been. Quote, I read the letter 3 times, each time feeling a different emotion. Sadness that my grandmother couldn't understand the difference between loyalty and enabling. Frustration that even she was more concerned about family reputation than justice for Stephanie's victims. And finally, clarity about why this cycle had continued for so long. Blood is thicker than water was the family motto, the excuse used to justify decades of covering for Stephanie's behavior. But I'd learned something in that courtroom, something that had been reinforced by the response from millions of strangers who'd watched my testimony. Chosen family can be stronger than biological family. The people who truly love you don't ask you to compromise your values to make them more comfortable. I sat down at my kitchen table and wrote a response. Dear Grandma, I understand that you're worried about the family, and I know you believe that blood is thicker than water. But I've learned that the full quote is actually, the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. It means that the bonds we choose, based on shared values and mutual respect, are stronger than the ones we're born with. I love Stephanie, and I love our family, but love doesn't mean enabling someone to hurt innocent people. Love means holding each other accountable, even when it's difficult. Especially when it's difficult. I hope someday you'll understand that protecting Emma from growing up in a family that normalizes criminal behavior isn't a betrayal. It's the most loving thing I can do for her. All my love, Rebecca. I mailed the letter that afternoon, knowing it would probably cause more family drama but no longer caring about maintaining peace at the expense of my principles. The breaking point came a week later, when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number at midnight. The message was short but devastating. Check Stephanie's Instagram story. Against my better judgment, I opened the app and navigated to my sister's account. She was supposed to be in jail awaiting sentencing, but apparently had been released on bond pending her appeal, something no one in the family had bothered to tell me. Her Instagram story was a masterclass in victim manipulation, a series of photos showing her looking thin and fragile, accompanied by text overlays that told a carefully crafted narrative. When your own sister destroys your life for internet fame, quote, families should protect each other, not profit from each other's pain. Some people will do anything for 15 minutes. The real victims are the families torn apart by betrayal. Each slide had hundreds of views and dozens of supportive comments from friends and family members I recognized. People expressed outrage on her behalf, calling me everything from heartless to fame-hungry to worse names I won't repeat. But the final slide was the most manipulative of all, a photo of Emma from her first birthday party, taken before Stephanie had arrived and destroyed everything. The text overlay read, I just want to be part of my niece's life again. She was using my daughter, posting her photo without permission, to garner sympathy and make me look like the villain for protecting Emma from her toxic influence. I screenshot the entire story and forwarded it to Detective Foster, knowing it could potentially violate the terms of Stephanie's bond. But more importantly, I realized that this social media campaign wasn't random. It was coordinated. The timing, the language, the strategic use of Emma's photo, this was the family's attempt to control the narrative and force me back into the dysfunction I'd escaped. I made a decision that would shock everyone who thought they knew me. I recorded a video response. Not for TikTok or Instagram or any social media platform. A video email that I sent to every family member who'd contacted me in the past 3 weeks. Every relative who'd tried to guilt me into reconciliation. Every person who'd suggested that I was being too harsh on the poor, misunderstood Stephanie. In the video, I sat in Emma's nursery, my daughter sleeping peacefully in her crib behind me. I spoke directly to the camera, my voice calm and steady. I've received a lot of calls and messages lately asking me to forgive and forget, to put family unity above everything else, to consider how my choices are affecting other people. So let me be absolutely clear about something. I will never apologize for protecting my daughter from toxic people, even if those people are blood relatives. Stephanie didn't just commit crimes against strangers. She violated the trust of everyone who loved her, including me. She stole from vulnerable people to fund a lifestyle she couldn't afford, and when she was caught, instead of taking responsibility, she's now trying to manipulate the family into pressuring me to minimize what she did. If choosing my daughter's well-being over dysfunctional family loyalty makes me the villain in your story, I can live with that. Because Emma will grow up knowing that her mother had the courage to do what was right, even when it was hard. Even when it was lonely. Even when it meant losing people I thought I could count on. Anyone who thinks I should expose my child to criminal behavior, manipulation, and chaos for the sake of family unity can join Stephanie in being cut out of our lives. This is not a negotiation, this is not a phase, this is a permanent boundary, and it's non-negotiable. Choose your side carefully, because I've already chosen mine. I sent the video at 1 a.m., then turned off my phone and went to bed. By morning, the family civil war was in full swing. Some relatives were horrified by my ultimatum. Others privately reached out to express support, but asked me not to mention their names to anyone else. A few, including my parents and my cousin Sarah, sent messages saying they stood with me completely. But the most surprising response came from my 80-year-old grandfather, who called me directly at noon. "Rebecca," he said without preamble, "I saw your video. Your grandmother is furious, half the family thinks you've lost your mind, and Patricia is organizing some kind of intervention." My heart sank. I'd hoped for his support, but I'd prepared myself for disappointment. "But I wanted you to know," he continued, "that I'm proud of you. Proud of you for standing up to bullies, even when they're family. Proud of you for protecting that little girl. And proud of you for having the guts to tell the truth when everyone else wanted to keep lying." I started crying, tears of relief, gratitude, and validation from the one family member whose opinion had always mattered most to me. "Thank you, Grandpa. That means everything." "Don't thank me yet," he said with a chuckle. "Thank me after you hear what I'm about to do next." And that's when I learned that sometimes the best revenge is watching toxic people destroy themselves when they realize they've finally pushed the wrong person too far. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.